Is Weberian bureaucracy undesired by nations with extractive political and economic institutions? When we think of bureaucracy, it is often associated under the shadow of corruption because of its pragmatic political approach and its scandalous role in some nations. Inspired by Max Weber's work on bureaucracy and Acemoglu and Robinson's Why Nations Fail, we asked ourselves, is Weberian bureaucracy undesired by nations with extractive and political institutions? We hypothesized that the two are incompatible. On the one hand, Weberian bureaucracy promotes principles of impartiality, consistency in decision-making, and fairness. Isolated in theory, Weberian bureaucracy is pure, effective, and just. These bureaucratic mechanisms embody a set of values which can be thought of as an antidote to corruption. In contrast, extractive political and economic institutions are synonymous with corruption, hindering of economic development, and concentrated political power in the hands of the few. Extractive institutions are institutions that are set up by the political elite to enrich themselves and augment their power at the expense of society. The Korean Peninsula provides a visual illustration of what extractive institutions does to society. The purpose of exploring if Weberian bureaucracy is undesired by nations with extractive political and economic institutions is to begin examining bureaucratic behavior and what role it plays in either combating or perpetuating institutional corruption. Contrary to what was initially hypothesized, academic research suggests that there seems to be a high level of bureaucratic presence in nations with extractive political and economic institutions. Recent academic research indicate that there exist incentive structures within bureaucratic mechanisms which can be manipulated to facilitate corrupt activities. Governments in developing nations have adopted bureaucratic mechanisms, but they have not experienced the intended results. In Nigeria, for an example, corruption is seen as a way of life. Successful implementation of Weberian bureaucracy that produces the intended outcome of impartiality, consistency in decision-making, and effectiveness depends on the way in which institutions are bureaucratically set up and the political will to control, monitor, and enforce those bureaucratic mechanisms. Logically, it is reasonable to argue if there are no sincere demands by politicians to pursue the war on corruption, then bureaucratic mechanisms are left exposed for exploitation. Critically, extractive political and economic institutions are able to perpetuate its existence because established generations have the advantage of forcing subsequent generations to obey the existing institutional behavior. In other words, extractive institutions lack the political will to pursue deterring corrupt bureaucratic behavior because it would be a fight against their own existence. However, Acemoglu and Robinson offers a way out of this by pointing to historical critical junctures. They are particular eruptive events, such as the French Revolution, that create circumstances for change. A more recent and relevant example would be the Arab Spring. Bowman and Deal in reframing organizations make us understand bureaucratic mechanisms as a necessary condition from the structural frame. We continue to make a multi-lens argument that if the members of those mechanisms do not internalize the values of bureaucracy, it will not achieve what Weber envisioned. Though the world still awaits to see if the Arab Spring brought about any long-term changes of substance, it is still reasonable to assume that if Max Weber would have been asked if Weberian bureaucracy is undesired by nations with extractive, political and economic institutions, he would have answered that one should not be fooled by extractive institutions' ability to perpetuate the illusion of bureaucratic mechanisms. They do not fulfill the true standards of Weberian bureaucracy.